I'm going to kind of give you a little different presentation. This has been very focused on north central Alabama, as it should be, but I want to kind of give you a description and some information on this initiative across the range, because this is we are in Cullman right here, roughly north central Alabama, and there are workshops like this and enthusiasm and interest going on range-wide. I can't possibly, I don't have enough time today to tell you about all the little areas that are popping up all the way from New Jersey to eastern Texas with an interest in shortleaf pine. And it's not a silver bullet. A couple people used that term before. It's one opportunity on public and private land. It has a place, and within that place it does a very good job. It has some real opportunities for public and private landowners. But I'm not sitting here to say the whole world would be better for shortleaf pine. You know, if you're working with private landowners, I'm a past consultant myself, but we've got good hardwood site, things like that. We're definitely going to manage for good hardwood saw timber. So, you know, this is one opportunity, and I'll explain how this fits in a little bit further on. But it's the largest geographic range. That gives us a lot of opportunity, also gives us a lot of headaches. Some of this is a review, but shortleaf really fit well with a frequent fire return interval in our part of the world for centuries and thousands of years, all the way back to the Native Americans. You know, it sprouted from that basal crook, and it was able to outcompete loblolly and some other southern yellow pines on the same site. That frequent return interval favored shortleaf. And early on, before we had synthetic fertilizers, after World War II, a lot of times agricultural land would revert to shortleaf pine because it could outcompete the loblolly. Loblolly lots of richer soil. So, you know, there's a lot of reasons shortleaf stayed on the landscape for a long time. In my home state of Tennessee, we've lost a lot of our shortleaf component out of our forests, just like you have in North Alabama. It was very rarely a pure, almost a monoculture type stand like they have in western Arkansas and parts of the range west of Mississippi. We did have nearly pure stands on the Cumberland Plateau. You've had nearly pure stands in parts of Alabama and Mississippi, but most of those have disappeared. And I'm going to show you a little bit of FIA data to kind of visualize that here in a minute, but it's not a surprise it disappeared. You know, it was a component because of fire return interval and disturbance. We went in as a society and cut that timber out. We didn't have fire on the landscape, the crowns and canopies closed back in. What little regeneration we had disappeared. So it's just faded out decade after decade after decade. I've seen a dramatic change in the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee just in my career as a forester. More recently, not only have we had the factors with the fire regime and field abandonment, but loblolly pine interest became very strong. I'm a past industrial forester. To this day, if I get a bad cut, I'm going to believe loblolly pine sap. You know, I put one of my daughters through college. It paid for a house. I'm very proud of the work I did. Loblolly still has a very, very important part in forest management in the southeastern United States. But loblolly was all we talked about. It was the silver bullet. It was the knight on the white horse. You know, you could about throw it out a truck window and you looked like you knew what you were doing, okay? When I went to forestry school, I went to the University of Tennessee, and I don't know how it was at Auburn or Georgia or Mississippi State or other land-grant universities, we didn't talk about shortleaf pine. The only time we talked about shortleaf pine was for about an hour in a wood technology class, and then we talked about dendrology. We had learned how to identify it, and that was it. You know, every time you brought it up, it just wrote it off. You know, it doesn't work, it doesn't grow as fast as loblolly, forget about it. This is some data that I wanted to share with you from Chris Oswald. And Chris works in FIA out of the Knoxville, Tennessee office. And he's a young man, he's very energetic, reminds me a lot of Chris. But he looks even younger than Chris, if that's possible. He looks like he's about 15, but he is a fireball, and he can make FIA data sound exciting. I wish he was here to present all this to you, because he really does a good presentation. But a couple of things I thought you might be interested in. This is range-wide, and this is two cover types. This is shortleaf pine on FIA data and shortleaf pine oak. So this doesn't account for all shortleaf pine. It's the most common associations. In Alabama, under 2012 data, we got about 400,000 acres, and most of that's in the shortleaf pine oak, probably about 60%. And you can see how you rank compared to other states. An interesting nugget out of this is that 68% of the acreage by FIA data is west of the Mississippi. Okay, that's still the kind of the epicenter of shortleaf pine. If you have an opportunity to go to Washita National Forest and go out to that part of Arkansas, make the trip, because there's people there that have more shortleaf pine in their yards than we have on wildlife management areas here. Okay, it's everywhere. There's entire industries based on shortleaf pine. And people go out the door and have for 10 or 15 years working with shortleaf pine day in and day out. It's really, it puts everything in perspective over there. So if you get a chance to travel, and then out of that, 34% in Arkansas alone by acres. So that kind of gives you a perspective of Alabama in the bigger picture. This is a little bit of a busy map, but it's got the little map, little range map, and as we all know, you don't step across that line and you step out of shortleaf range, and just because you're in that line doesn't mean you're in shortleaf type. But all the little gray pixels are FIA plots, and the red is where shortleaf shows up at least one tally, 1 inch or greater DBH. So that kind of gives you a little feel for the distribution of where that's at. And you can see how heavy it is in western Arkansas and southeastern Missouri and other places. It goes all the way up into New Jersey, gets down to the panhandle of Florida and eastern Texas, a lot of places that we typically think of shortleaf pine. And another real heavy concentrations in eastern Oklahoma. You know, everybody pictures tornadoes and prairie out there, but there's a lot of timber resource in the eastern part of the state. 13% change in timberland area. This is another way to look at it from 1980 through 2012, so roughly a 32-year time period. Alabama, you may not be able to see it way over on this far side. Everything's alphabetical. It's right here, and it shows, and this is shortleaf acreage, by the way. We've gone from about 17, 18, or 1.7 million acres roughly in 1980, down to less than 500,000 acres in 2012. And you can see the change in shortleaf acreage. It's been dramatic. My home state of Tennessee, right here, is a smaller shortleaf base, but a very similar trend. And the take-home message from this is every single state is either neutral or has gone backwards. So it's a tremendous loss over that year by FIA data. And this is one of the things that really kicked off an interest in Shortleaf Pine Initiative, is we've lost 52% of our shortleaf in the last 30 plus years just by FIA data. So it's very dramatic. We've gone a little over 12 million to about 6 million acres. So why shortleaf? Well, there's a lot of different reasons. It's not the right tree in every location. It is the right tree, the right system in some. It has a wide range, produces a very high quality saw timber. I've worked heavily in the Longleaf Pine Initiative. I'll tell you, as shortleaf folks, we don't have to hold our chin down longleaf folks at all on timber quality. We've got some real bragging rights for shortleaf pine also. It makes a tremendous dimension lumber, great header, great plate material, great joist. Very good dense wood, weighs the same as red oak green. It's used for the pole market. Clarence Coffey, retired from Tennessee, Wildlife Resource Agency. He's done a lot of research in Tennessee. He was heavily involved in the tar kiln industry. Even up in Tennessee, everybody thinks that was strictly a coastal plain phenomenon. But I would argue that it is a better fit in some areas over time for an increasing trend back towards a dimension product, a roundwood product, saw timber product, particularly on public and private land. If you're down in the coastal plain, you've got longleaf pine on public lands, whether state or federal, you have a good fit for ecosystem management. You put fire back on a landscape, you still provide goods and services for the public, have a good timber quality, a quality timber product for sale at the end of the rotation. Shortleaf gives you that opportunity further north out of the coastal plain. So it's a good fit under ecosystem management. I worked with the Department of Defense in Tennessee for 8 years, and we use shortleaf pine as part of our in-ramp to build up our fire capacity on our base. On private land, as a past consultant, I've worked with some landowners that want to know an internal rate of return or want to know land expectation value, and they calculated that that was an important part of their portfolio on their land, but oftentimes it was on a portion of the property where they could produce, whether it's loblolly or pine straw or something, where they get a high rate of return, pay for tiles and surveying and gravel and property tax and that kind of thing. But what really got them out of bed on Saturday morning was wildlife or recreation. And Shortleaf Pine, with the opportunity to hold it for a longer rotation and open it up more, get more sunlight and fire in the ground for wildlife habitat, I think it's going to be a very strong interest of private landowners, particularly when they can have a forest cover type that they can burn repeatedly and still sell. So I think it has some fits and changing objectives over time on private lands. The initiative itself was formed in 2013 to address these needs. And this is a true partnership. There's multiple federal, state, NGOs, a lot of folks coming on board every day, a lot of state wildlife and forestry agencies, so state forestry. We've got an advisory committee we formed. We're meeting next month to pull together some more of that information. So there's a lot of work in progress. And I'm talking fast because I got half an hour to try to cover what I normally cover in about 45 minutes. But I wanted to kind of give you a feel for how this effort fits here in Alabama and what you're a part of on a range-wide basis.
Mike, you take as much time as you need because I cut mine real short.
Okay. Don't give me that. No, don't loosen the bridle. I might take off. Okay. Let me give you a little history of how we got here, because there's a lot of folks and a lot of things that happened that had it not taken place, I wouldn't be speaking today, and I dare say we wouldn't be in this room right now. And I want to give credit to those people because it goes way back, long before I got involved. Back in the 60s, a lot of research work just stopped in Shortleaf. And it wasn't just a hard drop then. Some went on in the 70s and 80s, and some's gone on all the way through the period. But with the growing loblolly interest in the forest industry, Shortleaf just kind of fell off the face of the earth. There was a lot of folks that kept that spark alive. And Ed mentioned a bunch of them. Jim Goulden, a whole bunch of folks that I've not met, but I recognize their name. Ron Masters, George Hernandez didn't do research work, but he kept knocking on everybody's door for 25 years that would listen and say, hey, we got another southern yellow pine, you don't need to forget about it. Glenn Smalley up in Tennessee, a lot of other folks kept that little torch going, and it was smoldering. There wasn't any fire to it, but they kept it alive. A lot of management and research dollars dried up, so when that happened, you know, the focus went to other things. And forestry students rarely spend any time with Shortleaf. You know, I'm sure many of you had similar situations regardless of where you went to school. Then, George Hernandez and Bill Hubbard with the Southern Regional Extension Forestry Group out of Athens, Georgia, out of the University of Georgia, hauled together a workshop in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I don't know, was anybody at that workshop back in September 2010? They kind of threw it together. They thought maybe we'll get 25, 30 people in the door. They had 85. It was packed. It blew them away. They couldn't believe the interest in Raleigh, North Carolina. And there was a lot of state folks from North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, a few from Tennessee, interested about Shortleaf. And I was at that meeting. It was really interesting because everybody there kind of felt like possums in the dinosaur era. You know, we all represented agencies and organizations, a lot of private consultants, and nobody really wanted to talk first and bring it up. It was almost embarrassing. You know, it was almost like, well, yeah, I like Shortleaf, but don't tell anybody else that. You know, a lot of folks were interested in it, and you asked them why, and they couldn't tell you. They were tired of just talking about oak and loblolly and all these other things over and over and over again as professionals. From that meeting, several folks, George Hernandez said, we got to get this out of the Forest Service. We need some fresh blood in here. We need some people to step up. And there was a lot of people I want to give credit to because we formed, I was one of those folks, just one of them. We all got together. That was my first meeting in a brand new job, and I had to come back to my boss and tell him I was on a committee about Shortleaf Pine. he had no idea what that had to do with bobwhite quail, so I thought I was gonna be fired right off the get-go. But I saw the opportunity, and a bunch of us got together. We didn't have anything but an interest. We didn't have a single penny, but we met several times. A lot of those folks are Auburn folks, and they're not here, but Becky Barlow, John Cush, John Gilbert, Andy Scott with Forest Service out of Huntsville, Gary Peters with the National Wild Turkey Federation, Pat Kyler's out of UT in Knoxville, one of my co-workers, David Schnocky out of North Carolina, George Hernandez, Richard Shelfer with the Forest Service, Bill Hubbard, Kevin Guthrie out of Redstone Arsenal, a bunch of us, and there was a few others in there I've probably forgotten, came and went, but we met several times, did mission statements, vision statements, did a lot of things that were the groundwork for a range-wide plan. We didn't have a penny, we couldn't do anything, so we decided we're going to keep that torch lit, and we're going to have a national conference, and we held one in Huntsville, Alabama's first national conference. That was in September 2011. Well, it was a great success, 120 people there, still no money, still no anything. And following that conference, there's two other people I've got to mention, because I'm sure you this wouldn't be going on if it wasn't for these two gentlemen. Gary Myers came up to us. We were still folding chairs from the conference. Gary Myers is retired director with Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency, a little bitty man, real quiet, longest running director in the state wildlife agency in history. But he's very visionary. Doesn't say, he'd be at a meeting like this all day, wouldn't say two words, but you better hear him when he does, okay? He was one of the developers of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. He came up to us, cornered us, made us sit down, and said, you gotta have a plan. You know, this is great stuff. This gets fire back in the landscape, tremendous opportunity across nearly half the country. But until you have a plan, you don't have any credibility, you don't have a driven stake in the ground, you can't get other initiatives and funding and agency support, partner support. You've got to have a range-wide plan. And it's awesome. You know, why didn't we think of that? And then all of a sudden it came back to money. Well, it wasn't a couple of days later, Ken Arney called me on the phone and said, I've got a little money. It's not much. Won't even hardly fill a checkbook. But enough money to put on some workshops, gather stakeholders together, and start that range-wide planning process. So we're off and running. And this first working group, we kind of like I guess a mayfly. We made it and died, and went on, and the Forest Service formed another committee, and there was their dollars, and they put that all together, and got McCree Anderson. Many of you know McCree. He's from Arkansas, Tennessee Nature Conservancy. Doug Zollner worked on the original plan. We had some support at UT. I jumped back on it. George Hernandez stayed on it, several others. And we put together a planning team for the purpose of these workshops. And we held four. There's three of them shown here. We started in Knoxville, Tennessee in June of 2000. Let me get the years right. I believe that was 2013. That was our first workshop. We had about 100 people there. And then we went up to Roanoke, Virginia in October and had that meeting. Very good turnout, but that was when we had the federal sequestration. So we had a lot of federal partners who were not able to make that meeting. Then we went over to Fort Smith, and we actually held that in December. We're going to have it in September, but the Arkansas, Oklahoma SAF was having an annual meeting with nothing about shortleaf. We tag team our workshop onto that. We always plan on having a national meeting every other year, so we threw in a tour to Buffalo Road on the Washita National Forest and made a national convention out of that whole week. So we had a whole week of shortleaf pine that December. We got run out of town by an ice storm, so part of that got canceled, but that was a huge success. And then, as an afterthought, we had not only the federal folks had never had a chance to jump in, but we had a bunch of interest up in this area, and that blew my mind. And I don't like to stereotype any state or area or part of the country, but I thought, what in the world in Maryland, and New Jersey, and all that, where's all this interest coming from? We kept getting emails from state agencies up to the wildlife agencies, forest agencies, even private consultants. We went up there and had a workshop in Waretown, New Jersey last June. It was probably almost the biggest workshop we had. Unbelievable resource up in that area and unbelievable interest. So anyway, we had 4 stakeholder workshops, pulled that all together, and that plan is being prepared right now, and it's in the final stages. We've had planning team review it. Doug Zollner did the base plan. We've added to that. That's gone back to Jim Gould and Ron Masters, a lot of other folks that are well versed in shortleaf and a lot of expertise. And that will be a draft plan available on the shortleafpine.org website shortly. And it'll be a draft plan through about late summer. And so if you got input on that, we would love to have input. You know, tell us what's right, tell us what's wrong, tell us what we're missing, what needs to be adjusted. But it'll be a plan. It'll be out of date. It's printed, but it's something to work from and start the process. I've got a full-time director now. We're based out of University of Tennessee with Forest Service dollars. Be looking for other partners financially down the road. Tennessee Division of Forestry is just doing a pass-through on that. We've got partner development going, advisory committee set up, local initiatives popping up all over the country. This is not a top-down, you know, my title's a director, but I'm 180 degrees from that. I'm more of a cheerleader and promoter and go in areas and pull the spike strips out of the road. The local initiatives like this, I don't want to do anything but throw wood on a fire and open the door and get a breeze coming in, okay? These are put together from local partnerships for a very good reason. You know, down the road, when we have a lot of funders come in, it'll be like Longway. We'll have to have some accountability for these dollars and what kind of progress we're making. But right now, that's on page 2. I just want to get as much excitement and enthusiasm going as long as we do it in the right place with the right landowners. And I'm leaking this to the press today, but we've set up the 3rd biannual meeting in Knoxville on September 22nd through 24th. That'll be a range-wide focus. It'll be very different than this kind of workshop. Field day in the middle, and then we're going to move over to the eastern part of the range 2 years from now. And those are set up to alternate with the longleaf meetings. Having it every 2 years keeps a lot of drain of resources and money out on an annual basis, but it also makes it, I think, a lot of excitement. It makes it a can't miss meeting. That's what I've always liked about the longleaf. Here's who we've got on the advisory committee right now. We'll be meeting up in Nashville in March. We may add some names to this and if I can move this along over time. These aren't set in stone by any means, but these are folks that we've got involved with this initiative to provide feedback, guidance, and support. And we do have some challenges. I'm not going to come up here as director and say, boy, if you just plant shortleaf on your national forest or your state wildlife management area, work with your private landowners through NRCS, the world's going to be a better place. It will be if we go about it in the right way. But just like a lot of things in natural resources, there's a lot of challenges in there. We work on a different timeline. A lot of our successes don't show up in quarterly or annual reports. It takes time to build partnerships and trust and relationships. And a lot of times it's people, politics, and money doesn't have a whole lot to do with the trees or the critters. So this is a process, and we go along. But we do have some challenges. I was aware of these the last 4 years, and they've become very firmly entrenched with me the last 2 months. One is we got a large range, 22 states. If I just work with the state of Alabama, boy, would my job be easy as director. But I don't. I work with 22 different agencies, a lot of different joint ventures, a lot of landscape cooperative LCCs, another acronym, Fish and Wildlife Service, NRCS, a lot of different politics across the range, a lot of different culture. There's a huge disparity in the knowledge and working on the ground, understanding of shortleaf silviculture and habitat management and maintenance west to east. If I go west of the Mississippi River to Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, parts of Louisiana, those folks are very confident in their work on the ground. They've worked with shortleaf. They know what works and doesn't work. When I come east of the river, a lot of us, and we shouldn't be the least bit ashamed to admit it, we're still trying to find reference sites, demo areas, we've got a lot of training to do internally to get our confidence up and our comfort level up before we make the leap to private landowners. It's hard to sell something when you haven't done it yourself, when you haven't walked that leap. So we've got a lot of internal training to do at the same time the money comes in. There's huge differences in market. If we all jumped out of here, jumped in the bus, and went down the longleaf range, and we have longleaf pine to sell, or slash or loblolly in the coastal plain, we're not going to have any trouble in most areas getting a buyer. We may not like the price, we'll probably get multiple buyers. We can move the product, we can do the silviculture and the forest management to create wildlife habitat. In a lot of the shortleaf range, our markets have disappeared. Even in the good areas like western Arkansas, when I talk to them, they can sell saw timber all day long out of Washita National Forest, but they cannot hardly move a stick of pulpwood. Makes it real hard to thin, especially at an early age. Then you go just 100, 150 miles west to Oklahoma, tremendous resource. They can move pulpwood tomorrow morning. But there's no incentive for saw timber. There's not saw timber buyers in that area. So we've got a lot of work to do with folks like Southern Forest Products Association, a lot of rural development, NACD people, to develop markets in new areas and hold on to markets where we already have them. And then this last one, lack of prescribed fire outside the coastal plain. You know, we're kind of on the edge of that here, but when I go to a lot of states in the shortleaf range, it's disappeared in the local culture. It's disappeared even within the state agencies on doing prescribed burning. You know, unless there's a Department of Defense facility or a few national forests, a lot of prescribed burning doesn't go on. My home state of Tennessee is very similar to that. So we've got to restore fire, shortleaf fire, kind of go together like water and a recipe for good soup or gumbo. You've got to have fire in shortleaf. You can manage it without it, but it's for timber production and wildlife habitat. It really goes hand in hand. We don't have that capacity. We don't have that confidence. We don't have that tradition in a lot of the range across those 22 states. So we do have some challenges. Okay, it's not going to be all easy, but there's a lot of things that are already going on, and this workshop is phenomenal. I'm convinced we could throw a dart at the map, stick a sign out on the highway at 8 o'clock in the morning, say Shortleaf Workshop, and we'd have 20 people there at noon. A lot of interest in it, but a lot of us don't even know what kind of questions to ask. So if you feel that way, you're not alone. A lot of other folks, particularly east of Mississippi, in the same boat. And that's all I had. I got any time for questions, Chris?
Yes, sir.
This website is up and running, but we're completely rebuilding the website through Bill Hubbard's shop with SREF, and it's going to be, without stealing the thunder from those folks, it's going to be very impressive. But this is up and running and functional. You can find out a lot more about it there now. But, we'll have a new website up in the spring.
You mentioned the fire. Fire's gonna kill it, it just sprouts back, so you send yourself back to zero.
Well, that's at a very early age, but within the stand, it tolerates fire and adapts to fire well. You want to develop the understory. You know, when I did the work as quail, I can thin or I can burn, but thinning and burning is like 1 + 1 = 5. You know, one or the other alone just doesn't do it. If you're going to manage shortleaf, long-term, long rotations, particularly with a wild habitat focus, developing the understory, you've got to get sunlight and fire down the ground. Shortleaf, if Bree Anderson was here, folks that work in the western part of the range, they would scare you to death about how early you can put fire in shortleaf stands. No matter what number you throw out there, they say, burn it. Don't they, sir? Burn it. There's absolutely no hesitation, burn it. I'm not going to make that big a leap, but that's what they'll tell you over there.
You know, that's been one of the problems with the longleaf initiative with private landowners, is they're not fulfilling the burning obligation. That could very well be the same problem with this.
We'll be working with those folks very closely, I can assure you, because it's a common problem with management for southern yellow pine for wildlife habitat. Fire is a necessity. It's not anything magical. I can take loblolly pine and create phenomenal wildlife habitat, but I've got to get sunlight down the ground. I've got to get fire on it. So it's a common issue. It's not unique to shortleaf pine. Any other questions? Thank you.